A stranger walks into your house. You smile. You shake their hand. You invite them inside. Everything seems normal, but your dog doesn't move. No barking, no growling, no dramatic reaction, just a stare. A long, silent, uncomfortable stare. And for some reason, your dog never warms up to them. Weeks pass, months pass, maybe even years. And then one day, you discover something. The person wasn't who you thought they were. Suddenly, a question appears in your mind. Did my dog know? Almost every dog owner has a story like this. The friend their dog never trusted. The visitor their dog avoided. The person who always seemed to make their dog uncomfortable. And because these stories happen so often, many people have started believing something extraordinary. That dogs can sense bad people. Some even say dogs can smell evil. But is that actually true? Can a dog really detect something that humans can't? Or are we simply remembering the times they got it right and forgetting the times they didn't? The answer turns out to be far more fascinating than either of those possibilities. Because scientists have spent years studying how dogs evaluate humans. What they discovered wasn't magic. It wasn't a sixth sense. It wasn't anything supernatural. What they found may actually be more impressive. Because your dog is constantly collecting information about the people around them. Information you don't even realize exists. Tiny details, hidden signals, small inconsistencies, things most humans completely miss. And when all of those clues come together, they create something that looks almost impossible. The feeling that your dog knows something you don't. By the end of this video, you'll understand why. And you may never look at your dog's behavior the same way again. Number 1. The world looks different to a dog. Imagine walking into a crowded room. People are talking, moving, laughing, shaking hands, expressions, words, conversations. Your brain immediately begins focusing on faces. Humans are visual creatures. We rely heavily on what we see. Dogs don't. A dog enters that same room and experiences something completely different. The first thing that grabs their attention isn't a face. It's scent. Thousands of scents. Maybe tens of thousands. Information floating through the air that we never notice. To understand how extraordinary this is, you need to understand your dog's nose. Dogs can have more than 300 million. Humans have roughly 6 million scent receptors. Some breeds possess scenting, abilities so powerful that scientists still struggle to fully understand the limits. Imagine trying to compare a flashlight to a stadium floodlight. That's roughly the difference between our sense of smell and theirs. When you walk into a room, you notice the furniture. Your dog notices the emotional history of everyone inside. Who arrived recently? Who is nervous? Who is excited? Who has been somewhere unusual? Who interacted with another animal? Who is stressed? Who is relaxed? Scientists know that human emotions trigger chemical changes throughout the body. Stress hormones increase. Sweat composition changes. Breathing patterns change. Tiny biological signals begin appearing. Most humans never detect any of this. Dogs do. And that's where things start getting interesting. Because many of the people we instinctively describe as dangerous often display subtle signs of tension, stress, aggression, anxiety, unpredictability. Not necessarily because they're criminals, not because they're evil, but because emotional states leave chemical fingerprints. And your dog may be detecting those fingerprints long before you consciously notice them. But smell is only part of the story. Because if scent alone explained everything, dogs would never make mistakes. And they do. Which means something else is happening. Something even more fascinating. Your dog isn't just smelling people. They're watching them. Constantly. And what they notice next may surprise you. Number 2, your dog is watching more than you think. Here's something fascinating. Most people assume their dog is paying attention to the obvious things. The voice, the face, the words. But dogs are often paying attention to things we barely notice ourselves. The way someone enters a room, the speed of their movements, the tension in their body, the hesitation in their hands. Imagine 2 strangers walking toward your dog. One moves calmly, the other moves stiffly, slightly nervous, slightly tense. Most humans would never notice the difference. Your dog probably already has, because dogs evolved alongside humans for thousands of years. And during that time, they became extraordinarily good at reading human behavior. In many situations, better than we are. Not because they're smarter, because they're paying attention to different information. And scientists discovered something remarkable. Information we often ignore. Dogs don't simply observe people. They evaluate them. In 2015, researchers at Kyoto University conducted an experiment that surprised even them. A person pointed toward a container. The dog followed. There was food inside. The person pointed again. The dog followed again. This time, nothing. The person had provided false information. Then came the final test. The same person pointed toward food. The reward was there. The dog wanted it. And yet many dogs refused to follow. Why? Because they no longer trusted the person, not the container. The person. Your dog isn't blindly reacting to the world. Think about what that means. They're forming opinions about it. And sometimes, those opinions form much faster than ours. But reliability is only part of the story. Because the next study revealed something even more surprising. Dogs don't just pay attention to how people treat them. They pay attention to how people treat you. Number 3, they're not just watching people. They're watching you. Now here's where things become surprisingly emotional. Because the Kyoto study revealed that dogs pay attention to reliability. But another study revealed something even deeper. Dogs aren't only evaluating how people treat them. They're evaluating how people treat their owners. Think about that for a moment. Your dog may be paying attention to interactions that don't involve them at all. Imagine you're struggling with something. You ask someone nearby for help. One person helps. Another refuses. Most people would assume the dog doesn't care. After all, nothing happened directly to them. Nobody touched their food. Nobody threatened them. Nobody even spoke to them. They're just watching. But researchers wanted to know if dogs were paying closer attention than we realized. So scientists at Kyoto University designed an experiment. A dog sat beside its owner. The owner attempted to open a container and appeared to need assistance. Then another person entered the situation. In some cases, that person helped the owner. In other cases, the person deliberately refused. The dog watched everything. Afterward, both individuals offered the dog a treat. The same treat. At the same time. No pressure. No commands. Just a choice. And the results surprised researchers. When someone had refused to help the owner, many dogs avoided taking food from that person. Think about how remarkable that is. The dog wasn't choosing based on food. The dog wasn't choosing based on personal experience. The dog was responding to how someone had treated the person they cared about. And suddenly, a lot of stories dog owners tell begin making more sense. The visitor your dog never liked. The stranger your dog avoided. The person your dog seemed uncomfortable around for reasons you couldn't explain. Maybe your dog wasn't sensing something supernatural. Maybe they were noticing something social. Something happening between people. Because dogs spend their lives studying us. Our routines. Our emotions. Our relationships. And that means they often notice changes before we do. The slight hesitation in your voice. The tension in your body. The discomfort you haven't even consciously recognized yet. Your dog sees it. Not because they're psychic. Because they're paying attention. And the more emotionally connected your dog is to you, the more attention they pay. Which leads to a fascinating question. If dogs can evaluate how people treat their owners, could they also be detecting something else? Something even more subtle. Something humans usually miss entirely. Because the next piece of this puzzle isn't about trust. It isn't about behavior. It's about smell. And what dogs can smell may be far more extraordinary than most people realize. Number 4, the scent of fear. Now we arrive at the part that sounds almost unbelievable. When people say, "My dog can smell evil," they're usually wrong. But they're not completely wrong. Dogs probably aren't smelling a person's character. They're smelling something connected to it. Emotion, stress, fear, anxiety. Because when humans become nervous, their bodies change. Heart rate shifts, breathing changes, stress chemicals are released. To us, these signals are invisible. To dogs, they're information. Remember, your dog has hundreds of millions of scent receptors. Their nose processes details that never reach your awareness. Scientists have found that dogs can distinguish between scent samples collected from stressed people and samples collected when those same people were calm. That means a dog doesn't always need to see someone behaving differently. Their nose may already know something has changed. And suddenly, many strange dog behaviors begin making sense. The dog that becomes cautious around a nervous visitor. The dog that keeps watching someone who seems anxious. Sometimes dogs react to behavior, but sometimes the reaction may begin with scent. Because emotions leave chemical fingerprints, and dogs are remarkably good at reading them. But scent is only one piece of the puzzle. Dogs also notice movement, posture, voice, Tension. They gather dozens of tiny clues and combine them into a larger picture. That's why some dogs seem uncomfortable around people everyone else trusts. Not because they predict the future, not because they possess supernatural abilities, but because they're receiving information we're simply unable to detect. Dogs don't detect evil. Dogs detect signals. And when enough signals point in the same direction, they begin making judgments. But how do all of those signals come together? Because smell alone isn't enough. Body language alone isn't enough. Trust alone isn't enough. Yet somehow, all those pieces combine into something that can look almost magical. And the next study may explain why. Number 5, the experiment that changed everything. Up to this point, we've talked about smell, body language, trust. But one question still remains. How do we know dogs are actually putting all of this information together? The answer comes from one of the most fascinating discoveries in dog psychology. Dogs don't just react to people. They remember them. And that changes everything. Researchers studying dog cognition found that dogs can remember previous interactions with specific people, not just what happened, who it happened with, who felt safe, who felt uncertain, who proved reliable, who didn't. And once those associations form, they begin shaping future decisions. That's why a visitor your dog seemed unsure about the first time may trigger an immediate reaction the next time they arrive. Because your dog isn't relying on a single scent or a single movement. They're building a picture made from dozens of tiny observations collected over time. The scent they detect, the movements they notice, the tension they observe, the trust they've experienced, the way someone treats you. All of it gets combined. And eventually, a conclusion begins to form. Not in words, but as a feeling. Safe, unsafe, predictable, unpredictable, comfortable, uncomfortable. And perhaps that's the most important thing to understand. When owners say, "My dog didn't trust that person," they're usually not describing a moral judgment. They're describing an ancient pattern recognition system, one refined over thousands of years, which may explain why dogs sometimes notice things long before we do. Not because they're magical, but because they're paying attention to information we often miss. But if dogs are so good at reading people, why do they sometimes get it wrong? Because the answer to that question reveals the most important truth in this entire story. Number 6, why dogs aren't always right. By now, you may be thinking about someone your dog never trusted, someone your dog seemed uncomfortable around, and maybe your dog eventually proved right. That's why many people believe dogs can always detect bad people. But science tells a different story. Dogs are remarkably good at reading signals, but they're still dogs. And sometimes, dogs get things wrong. They aren't reading minds. They aren't seeing the future. They're making decisions based on information, just different information than we use. Imagine someone who's afraid of dogs. Their body becomes tense. Their breathing changes. Their movements become awkward. To your dog, those signals may seem unusual, even suspicious, but that person isn't dangerous. They're simply afraid. The same thing can happen when someone arrives stressed, upset, or worried. Your dog notices the tension, the posture, the scent, the mood. But none of that automatically means the person is a threat. Dogs don't detect evil. They detect signals. And signals aren't always the same thing as truth. Think about a smoke detector. Most of the time, it warns you about something important. But sometimes, it reacts to burnt toast. The alarm isn't broken. It's responding to information. Dogs work in a similar way. When your dog becomes cautious around someone, it doesn't automatically mean they're dangerous. It means your dog noticed something unusual, something worth paying attention to. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part. Dogs aren't spending all day analyzing strangers. They're spending most of their lives paying attention to you, watching your emotions, your routines, your relationships. Because the real reason dogs care so much about people has very little to do with danger and everything to do with attachment. And once you understand that, everything starts making sense. Number 7, the real reason dogs notice things we miss. We've talked about scent, body language, trust, memory. But one thing connects all of them: attachment. Because your dog isn't spending the day trying to identify bad people. They're spending the day paying attention to you. They notice when you leave, when you return, when you're excited, when you're nervous, when you're upset. Because you are the most important part of their world. Researchers studying dog owner relationships describe owners as a dog's secure base. the place they return to when they feel uncertain, the source of comfort when something feels wrong. And if you are their source of safety, then paying attention to the people around you suddenly becomes very important. The stranger who makes you uncomfortable, the visitor whose behavior feels unpredictable, the person whose signals don't quite match. Your dog notices because your dog cares. Not because they're searching for danger, but because they're constantly monitoring the world around the person they love most. You. And perhaps that's the real answer behind stories about dogs sensing bad people. Maybe it isn't supernatural at all. Maybe it's something even more extraordinary. A lifetime of observation, an incredible ability to read signals, and a bond with humans that has been growing for thousands of years. Because long before dogs became our pets, they became our companions, our observers, our protectors. And perhaps that's why dogs sometimes seem to know things before we do. Not because they're magical, but because they're paying attention to the world. And most importantly, to you. The next time your dog meets someone new, watch carefully. Not because your dog is a lie detector, not because your dog can see into someone's soul, but because your dog is paying attention in ways most humans never will. They're watching, listening, smelling, learning, building a picture from hundreds of tiny details. And while that picture isn't always perfect, it can sometimes reveal things we completely miss. So if your dog pauses before trusting someone, don't panic. Don't assume the worst. But don't ignore it either. Because your dog may be noticing something worth paying attention to. After all, they've spent their entire life studying people. And nobody has spent more time studying you than they have. Maybe that's why dogs occasionally seem to know things before we do. Not because they can smell evil, but because they're incredibly good at noticing the signals that often come before it. And perhaps that's one of the most remarkable things about the bond between dogs and humans. They're always paying attention, even when we aren't. What about your dog? Have they ever disliked someone for no obvious reason? And later, did you discover they were right? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind dog behavior, make sure to subscribe to the Paw Decoder. Because the more we understand our dogs, the more extraordinary they become. We'll see you in the next one.